If you're having problems punch needling, I am here to help. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jessica and I'm the owner of Our Cheery Corner, where I sell hand punch needle goods such as car coasters, large coasters, tote bags, phone grips, and I also sell keychains of dogs and cats that I design, stickers, punch needle DIY supplies such as frames, punch needles, DIY punch needle kits. My website will be linked below, but today's video I am here to help address some problems people have been having with punch needling. My typical content is behind the scenes running a small business. I do studio vlogs weekly and I take you through preparing for pop-up events and going to pop-up events, but today's video, like I said, is going to be addressing problems people are having with punch needling. So my most popular YouTube video on my channel is a how to punch needle video, and I go through all the materials I use to punch needle. I link everything in the description. I show you how to punch needle and what has worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, different issues you might encounter and how to solve them. And since posting that video, I've had a ton of positive feedback and it seemed to have been very helpful for people, so I'm gonna link it in the description. But today's video is kind of a part 2 addressing issues that people are still having, or just clarifying and reiterating some important things that will help you solve the issues you're having, because punch needle can be very finicky and I want to help as much as I can. I wrote everything I want to talk about down. So first I want to go over some common issues and solutions to those issues, and then I'm going to get into some frequently asked questions. So let's do it. So before I get into some common issues, I want to stress the importance of having the correct yarn, fabric, and needle combination, because if one of those things is off, it's just not gonna work. So if you want to see what has worked for me, you can head to the video I made on how to punch needle. Like I said, I'll have it linked in the description. I personally use muslin fabric, acrylic yarn, and the Mina Corinne punch needle, and I do sell the Mina Corinne punch needle on my shop. It's my favorite needle. I've used a bunch of different ones, tried out a bunch of different ones. This one has been the best for me, so now I buy them in bulk and sell them as well. And then I also want to mention we sell the punch needle frames. We have the large size. This is completely handmade. This is a 15 by 15 frame, and then we also have the smaller size, which is the 10 by 10 inches by 10 inches. And obviously I have some fabric on here already with designs that I'm gonna work on for my business. And if you're just getting into punch needle and you have no idea what this is, it's to stretch your fabric over so that you can work with a bigger surface area, but it's also super useful because it holds the fabric better than a hoop does, like an embroidery hoop from a craft store. If you're having issues with your fabric not staying tight and you have to constantly tighten it as you work, I suggest getting a gripper strip frame, and that will be linked in the description as well. Okay, one more thing before we get right into this is I want to show you how to thread your needle, because if it's not threaded properly, again, it's just not gonna work. I put my finger so that you can see the smaller part. This is the large part. Like so, and then I'm gonna put my threader into the small hole and all the way down the whole needle. I usually have to take this bottom part off because the threader gets caught. And then when you put the bottom part back on, make sure the threader is going through it, like so. So the threader is going through the smaller part of the needle. I'm just gonna open up this threader, take my yarn, and you're gonna put the yarn into the threader, like so, and then just pull this straight out. So your yarn is going through the whole needle and out the small hole. And then whenever I punch needle, I work with about 1/4 inch of a tail, so about this much. So we have the yarn threaded, we know that it's done correctly, we can now move on to issues you might run into. So if your yarn is not flowing smoothly through the needle as you punch, so this is how mine's flowing, I have to pull a little bit, but it's not getting stuck, so it's moving pretty easily through my needle. If yours is not, you probably have a yarn that's too thick for your needle. This Mina Corinne punch needle set comes with 3 needles and they're all different sizes. This is the largest needle. It is the one that comes installed. It's the only needle I've ever used. And unfortunately, it doesn't have a size on the package, so I don't know the size of the needle, but I know it's the largest one it comes with. So if you're using size 3 or 4, it might be too large for your needle, and that is why it's not flowing smoothly and your punches are probably coming out of your project. And I do want to stress that all of this information is based on trial and error and my own experience, and I'm just trying to help as I can. And as I said, I've used muslin fabric with this yarn and needle. Duck fabric has also worked for me. I sell DIY punch needle kits, and duck fabric is what comes in those kits. It's a very nice beginner fabric because it's just less finicky than muslin. Muslin tends to rip and get compromised more often than duck fabric. The only thing with duck fabric is that it has a little more resistance than muslin. So when you're punch needling, it's a little harder to punch through the fabric. It's a thicker fabric, which can in turn make your hand hurt a little more if you don't take breaks. But other than that, I really suggest duck fabric if you're starting out. Okay, now I want to show what to do if your fabric does get compromised. So like I was just saying, this tends to happen more with muslin, from my experience at least, than with duck fabric. Usually when the fabric gets compromised, it's because you've punched over the same spot one too many times, or it just, I don't know, sometimes it just gets compromised and I don't understand why. So I'm gonna just punch over the same spot a bunch. Okay, so here you can see the fabric is compromised. I've tried to scratch it back into place. Again, I would highly suggest watching the first video of how to punch needle that I've made if you're new to it, because I go over some things that I'm not going over here, such as to scratch it back into place if it's a little compromised. So I do think that video is very helpful. This is kind of a follow-up, but if you're not new to punch needle and you've just been running into these issues, this video should be helpful on its own. But so we have this fabric, it's compromised. Let's make it a little more compromised. So as I punch needle, the yarn is coming out, as you can see. So what I'm gonna do, when I get to the compromised area, I'm gonna put my finger over the yarn as I make the punches. So I'm manually keeping the punches in the fabric. So as you saw before I was doing this, these punches were coming out, but now that I've done that, I'm gonna flip the project over and you can see the punches stayed in. So that's if your fabric is really compromised, you don't want your project to go to waste, obviously. This is how I solve that issue. Okay, the next issue people are running into is that when they punch needle, their needle is retracting and just not staying put in the needle body. So they punch and then this silver part of the needle shoots back. So that's likely happening because the knob here is not tight enough. So if it's a little loose, like so, and I punch needle, the needle's just gonna go back. So you need to make sure that the knob is super tight and that the needle isn't gonna go anywhere when you punch needle. So simple solution, just make sure this knob is very tight. The most common issue with punch needle is that the punches are not staying. So we already went over the fact that you need to have the right yarn, needle, and fabric. Again, that is in the first video I've posted on how to punch needle. But if you have the right combination and your punches are still not staying, there's a few things that could be causing it. First off, you always need to have slack in your yarn while you're working. So it needs to be loose from where it's coming out of the needle. So if you're leaning on your yarn, if it's wrapped around the knob, which can happen, or any other reason that the yarn is being restricted, your punches are not gonna stay in the fabric, it's gonna pull out. The other thing that could be happening is this grip is sliding down. Now this is only if you have this Mina Corinne punch needle, but it's something that as you're punch needling, it happens and you don't always notice it's happening. So if this is coming down, it's gonna make it so that you can't punch all the way through the fabric. So just make sure that you're adjusting your grip and it's staying up here at all times. So another issue that could be happening is that your loops are not the same size. If you're unfamiliar with punch needle, when you punch needle into fabric, it creates loops on the opposite side, which is the front side of your project most typically. You can also make the flat side the front side of your project, which I'll go over in a little bit. But typically when you're punch needling, the loops are the front. So if your loops are not the same size, it's likely because you're not punching all the way down every time that you go through the fabric, which would mean that, you know, if you only go this much, and then you go all the way, and then only this much, and then all the way, they're not gonna be the same size. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is that you're not pulling the needle too far out of the project when you go to make your next punch. If you pull too far out, the punch is just gonna come out like that. So you need to make sure you're dragging the needle. So I come up just a little bit, drag, and punch again. And sometimes if you drag too far, that'll also shorten the loop. So make sure that you're dragging only a little bit, the same amount between each loop to ensure they stay the same size. You're not pulling the needle too far out, just dragging just a little bit. If you drag too far again, that'll make that loop a little shorter than the rest. So now I want to go over some frequently asked questions. So the first question is, what yarn and fabric do I use? So I use muslin fabric, and for my yarn I use sport weight yarn that's 100% acrylic. I'm pretty sure it's size 4. I used to think it was size 2 because I thought sport weight meant size 2, but I think it means weight 2. I'm gonna be honest, I get very confused with yarn terminology, but from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the size is based on how many plies is in your yarn. So if you pull the yarn apart, you can see individual strands. So if I pull mine apart, I see 4 strands. So I think I'm using size 4 yarn in sport weight. The exact yarn I use will be linked, but yeah, I've just tried so many different yarns and fabrics and needle combinations that this is the one I landed on that works for me. I never really paid attention to what weight I needed. I was just going down in size for the yarn because I knew that size 4 was too big and size 3 was too big. But now that I look at this looks like size 4. So it might be the weight that really matters. And the other thing I understand is that the plies themselves, the individual strands, can have different thicknesses, which will make the yarn thicker overall. So yes, I'm sorry I don't have a really clear-cut answer for that because that is important. But I do have the yarns I've used in the past linked in my past video, and I'll link the current yarn I use in this video. So hopefully that's helpful enough. And the other question is how to tell what size yarn you're using. So again, like I said, if you pull the strands apart, you should be able to tell what size, if I'm not incorrect in that that's how that works. So again, from my understanding, this is size 4, but a lot of the yarn packages will say on the package what size it is. So I used to go to Michael's for my yarn, and I could easily identify which ones were size 3 and 4 based on the package. And I will say a lot of popular craft stores don't have a lot of that thinner yarn or yarn that has worked for me, so I have to get my yarn online. Okay, the next commonly asked question, which I'm surprised I didn't go over this in the first video, is what length I keep my needle at, because that's also very important. You need to have the right needle length for your loops to stay. So I found that the sweet spot with the combination I use is setting my needle between 6 and 8, so at 7, and I do it so that this point of that metal piece is at 7, not the very top, but the point that sticks out here. So as you can see, my numbers are faded, but it's set at 7. 6 and 8 have worked for me if you want to play around with different lengths, but 7 is kind of the sweet spot, and that's specific to this needle. I'm not sure what the lengths were on the other needles I used. It was a lot of trial and error and just finding out what length worked the best. Some of them I literally would measure with a ruler and write down so I knew what it was always at, because they didn't even have numbers on the side. And to adjust your needle, you just turn the knob, that's why this is here, and you can go up and down until you land on the size you want, and then you tighten it. The next question is what needle size do I use, which I went over a little at the beginning. I use the largest needle that comes in the Mina Corinne pack. I don't know the exact number because it doesn't say, but it's the largest of the 3. It's the one that comes installed. Then I had some questions asking where do I find my designs for the punch needle. So designs like this. I make all my designs. I use Procreate to design them, and then I print them and laminate them so I can reuse them and keep them as stencils. Another question I get is which side of the project is the front. So that's completely up to you. I punch needle so that the loops are in the front, in which case I work from the back of the project, so that when I turn it over, the loops will be the front of the project. That means my designs are mirrored, so keep that in mind. But if you want the flat side to be the front, your designs will not be mirrored and you'll be working from the front side of the project. So what you're gonna do in that case is you're gonna make your first punch, turn your project over, and you're gonna pull this yarn through so that the tail is on the back side of your project. And this is important because when you finish your project, you need all these tails to be on the back side of your project so you can trim them and glue them down so that the punches won't come out of your project. So now you have the tail on this side. My tail is super long. Usually it's only gonna be like 1 inch or 1/4 inch. But now you can turn your project back over and you can work so that the flat side of the yarn is the front of your project. And then when you finish, same thing, you need your strand to be on the back side of your project. So I'm gonna trim it. I'm gonna make an extra loop so that you can do this with the final loop. You're gonna take that final loop and pull it through. I haven't made a project where the flat side's the front, but if I was to, this is how I would do it. So now we have the strands on the back side of the project, and this would be the front. The next question I got is what color do I punch first? And that's completely up to you. The way I do it is I punch the smaller details first, and then I do the background. So let's take this paw print. I'll punch needle the paw first, and then I'll do the background. With something like the 8 ball, I personally do the 8 first, then I fill in the little circles, then I do this smaller circle, then the larger circle. Again, it's completely up to you. That's just what I found works best for me, how I like to do it. And the last question I saw a lot is what glue do I use to finish my project? And I just use hot glue. I use Gorilla Hot Glue for the backing of my coasters, my car coasters, my tote bags. I believe I've seen people use Mod Podge, But yeah, personally I just use hot glue and it's worked great for me. So if this has made you interested in punch needling, or you haven't had success on your own and you just want the right combination delivered to your door, I do sell beginner punch needle kits. We have a few different designs to choose from at the moment. We have citrus ones, a cloud one, and a cactus one. Here are some of them. For example, you can make these with the DIY punch needle kits, and these are coasters. And then I also sell refill kits, such as this heart coaster. I sell a peach design one. I sell, I think the citrus ones are also available as refill kits, a cow print one. All of that will be linked in the description. And if you're really ready to dive into punch needle, like I said, we sell the frames to punch needle with in a large and a small size. Sometimes they're out of stock, but we try to restock pretty frequently. They're made to order, so keep that in mind when you do order. Look at the processing times. I think it's 5 to 7 days or something like that. Nothing crazy. And then we sell the Mina Corinne punch needle as well. So I hope you found this video helpful. I do not know everything by any means. Like I said, I don't even understand completely the yarn size and how that works. And so I probably have misspoken in that last video saying I use size 2. I'm just so used to saying I use size 2 because I thought sport weight was size 2, but I'm not so sure about that anymore. But I hope you can find some value from this video and that questions you had are hopefully now answered. And if you want to stay up to date on my business and my business journey, I hope that you subscribe and stick around, and that I will see you in my next video. Even if I